Hello and welcome to Commercial Lines Prospecting and the Interview. Last webinar in the three-part series, this is part 2, we discussed how to create the foundation for your commercial lines sales and marketing campaign. And today we're going to talk about the prospecting process and the interview. This information is based off of 6 agencies that I had personally interviewed, as well as my own personal experience and other resources such as the Dynamics of Sales program from the National Alliance of Insurance Education. So today we're going to talk about the next steps, which is basically you've got your prospecting foundation, you've got your suspects list and your prospects list here narrowed down. Now you need to actually go out, but what do you actually do when you go out? So that's basically what we're going to go through today. All right. First and foremost, and most importantly, everyone has their own sales style. Some people, like I mentioned last time, are hard closers. Some people are soft closers. Some people do great in person. Some people do great over the phone. We did discuss that, I guess statistically you could say, or based off of the people that I interviewed and information out there in the marketplace, that in-person is probably the most effective because it is more difficult for a person just to, I guess, not answer their phone, pretend they're someone else, or just throw away your postcard. But in person, you do tend to get the best results. We're going to talk about how to do that in-person sale or the in-person ask for the interview. And most importantly, though, the pitches and, I guess, content that we're going to discuss today, obviously you will want to reword so that it sounds like your voice and so that you make it your own. So first off, like I mentioned last time, you need to obtain your target class list from your carriers and generate those suspect lists and refine it into prospect lists. Next, as I mentioned last time, you're going to create some sort of a flyer or have a business card that you take with you and drop off at the business. This is basically something that's going to be easy to read so that they accidentally read it while you're asking for the expiration date. And it's going to highlight solutions to pains in the current marketplace if you do choose to go the flyer route. Okay, let's get down to something new here. So this is what you actually do. So you've got your lead list or your prospect list, and now you're ready to start going. Obviously, you want to try to make it so that you're visiting people, in a particular area, so you're not driving all over town. You can do that a couple ways. If you have 10 different types of businesses that you're going to go after, in the morning or whenever you're preparing the night before, you can determine, okay, I'm going to visit these 20 businesses, 5 are from this type of business that I can prospect, 5 are from this one, 2 are from this one, 3 are from this one, but they're all in the same geographic area, so you can, that's why it's important to have more than just one type of business. Like, for example, if you're going after personal private passenger auto mechanics, you might also go after body shops, and you might also go after sign manufacturers, and if all of those are on your list rather than just mechanics, because otherwise obviously you'll be driving all over the place and just spending a lot of time on the road or spending a lot of gas money. So when you pick your area that you're going to target and you have your 10 to 20 businesses that you're going after in that area, the key is to walk in with a single card or a single flyer so that you don't look like that yellow page ad salesperson, and just ask for the owner by first name. The key here is to get through the gatekeeper if there is one, and to sound like you know the person or sound as casual as possible. So if on your lead list that you have it says, Robert Smith is the owner, you're going to want to go in and just say, hey, is Bob available? Or is Bob there? Whatever's in your voice. If it's a man that is behind the register, you always want to assume that you're talking to the owner, because from personal experience, nothing makes you look more silly than if you go in and say, hey, is Bob there? And they say, oh, I'm Bob. Or sometimes they would just tell me, no, he's not, even though I figured out that was Bob. So always assume who you're talking to is the owner. Usually when I walk in and I say, hello, Bob? No, I'm not Bob. He's in the back. Well, then I know that Bob's there, and then I'll ask to talk to him. But that's a good tool, I guess, to get through that gatekeeper, and I guess just a tip for when you're trying to talk to that person. Again, casual as possible. what you're doing is no big deal, and the more you kind of make it feel like what you're doing is no big deal and you're just in asking, to get a bid on their insurance, the better. Most of the time they're pretty used to it anyway. Okay, so let's say that Bob behind the register is who you need to talk to, and you said, "Hello, Bob?" "Yeah, okay." The next step is quite simply you're trying to find the expiration date. So you would just hand them your flyer or your business card, because it's always good to just offer something, and say, "Well, hey, Bob, my name's Josh. I work for All American Insurance down there on Havelock Avenue. I just, wanted to quote your insurance when it came up for renewal, but I didn't know when that was, though," and just kind of trail off. It's human nature to finish a person's sentence usually, and usually what they'll say is, "Well, it comes up in December, but I'm not really interested in a quote right now." Perfect. You got the X date. Mission accomplished. And if you remember from the previous webinar, that king in the crosshairs there was getting the expiration date. So if they say it comes up in December and they're not interested, you just say, "No problem at all. I'll just check back maybe when it gets a little closer. And if you change your mind, my information's on the flyer or on the card here. Feel free to give me a call." And then I head back to the car or head back outside, and I store it in my database, whatever it is that works for me. I store in my database the expiration date, and then I move on from there. If it just so happens that luck should strike and it is 90 days from the renewal, then I can proceed to the next step, which is trying to set up an interview. I will say that ideally it's not, because it's easier to come back to the person and say, "Oh, hey, I spoke to you a while back and you mentioned your policy came up in December, and I just needed to get that just needed about 10-15 minutes and we can get you a quote." It's a lot easier to do that because they can never quite remember how the first conversation went. But if in fact it is 90 days out, you can proceed to the next step, which is going back when, obviously it's closer to the expiration date, and basically just saying, walking in and by the way, in your notes, and Tommy actually laughed when she saw my notes in my Excel spreadsheet, because I would have things like gray-haired lanky guy with glasses standing behind the register was Bob. And I did that because that way when I walked back in, I would remember what Bob looked like, because I talked to so many people. I was probably talking to around 50 or 60 people a week. But anyways, when you go back in, you just say, "Hey Bob, I spoke to you a while back. You mentioned your policy was coming up in December. I wanted to get you a quote, but didn't know when a good time to meet would be. Probably take 10 or 15 minutes, but are Tuesdays or Thursdays better for you?" My sales style was fairly soft. I was more comfortable with option closes, so that was my personal style, and it really worked pretty well, to be honest with you. I guess my rate of getting an interview was pretty high compared to some of the other people I've talked to. So that's one method, and so that's what I'm putting down here. But I'd option close them, are Tuesdays or Thursdays better for you? And they'd say, "Well, Thursdays are better." "Okay, well, are mornings or afternoons better for you? Either way is fine." And they'll probably say, "Well, typically mornings." "Okay, well, I'll be in Tuesday at 9:30 or Thursday," however it worked. And then I'd start to basically turn around and head out. I mean, the mission is get that interview, get that foot in the door. If you feel like they're open to talk, go for it. My experience, and maybe it was just for me, they seemed like they were kind of a little busy, so I would always respect their busyness and establish the meeting. And I might even say sometimes, "Well, it looks like you're busy, so I'll be back in on Tuesday at 9:30, and I really appreciate your time. Have a good day." And then I would either I would turn to walk away, or what I'd usually say is pull the old Columbo trick and basically say, "Oh, one more thing. If you can have your policy handy, or even a copy of it, it'll actually shorten our thing. It might only take 7 or 10 minutes," and which is accurate. So I would leave with that as kind of the last thing they heard. And based off of other people I've spoken to, that is the same thing that they would do too. Sometimes they wouldn't work around it like I did. They would just blatantly say, okay, I'm going to need you to have your policy handy when I come back in. We'll talk about why, obviously, they need to have that if it's not obvious enough, but that's really all there is to it. So to back up, for getting the interview, I'm just telling them my name, asking when the X date is, and then I'm leaving. That's my first objective. When's the X date? Unless, obviously, it comes up in 90 days, then I proceed to the next step, but otherwise I come back and I make them feel like they have the impression the last time I was in, they agreed to a quote or agreed to an interview, interview meeting. And then I option close them as to the day, and then I option close them as to the time, and then I just pop out, move out the door and say, oh, by the way, if you can have your policy handy, it'll be super easy, 7 to 10 minutes. Now, if they say no, or I'm just not interested, whatever, then there are several rebuttals. Some of the most popular ones that I gathered from people were, oh, well, I just wanted to get you a quote. It's no big deal. If nothing else, it's good to have a second opinion. So, are Tuesdays or Thursdays better for you? So, again, I'm going back into my close. If they say no, well, I'm just still pretty busy. Well, it is good to review your policy from time to time. I don't know, when was the last time your current agent met with you to review your policy? That is probably the best one that I've heard from people, or at least that worked for me, because quite typically their agent, who they're quote-unquote friends with possibly, hasn't been in to see him for like 10 years or 6 years or 4 or however long. And then, I might say, well, we think at our agency it's good to have that policy looked at least once a year. So, if nothing else, I'd just be happy to take a look at it. Again, I'm just trying to get the interview at this point, and sometimes that's a good tool to help me get that interview. The other thing I will say, just kind of as a tip, is it's very important that your voice goes down at the end of every sentence. So, in other words, if I say something like, if nothing else, it's good to get a second opinion, that's a question and it's not very confident. It's always good to make sure that your sentence goes down. Like, if nothing else, it's good to get a second opinion. So are Tuesdays or Thursdays better for you? Rather than, are Tuesdays or are Thursdays better for you? Anytime your voice goes up at the end, and I apologize if this is something you guys are obviously aware of, but anytime your voice goes up at the end, that is probably, when I've gone on calls with people to try to help them, that is the most common reason why they are getting slammed, is because they do not sound confident. And that just has to do with the way that you stand, the way that you hand them the card, and the way that your voice sounds, in that you're instructing or confident and your voice is going down as a sentence. It's probably, at least in my experience, one of the most common reasons why, once they fix that, they just have a lot better result, because then at that point these people feel like, oh, I'm dealing with a professional here. They do this all the time. They're confident. Okay, fine. I'll give you a quote. I'll give you 10 minutes. That's fine. I'm interested in a quote. So that's just, I guess if it's something you're not familiar with, a tip that really has helped out on the most common times I've seen people having issues. Okay. They've agreed to the interview, and they're agreed to meet with you Tuesday at 9:30 a.m. So now we need to get ready. And the way that we prepare for the interview, is we look up the risk on the Better Business Bureau. We look at the county assessor, get a feel for the building. A lot of things will show up at that point, like, oh, I didn't realize that they had another business in the building, or, oh, they don't own the building, they're tenants. Stuff like that will help you kind of have an idea when you go in what you're preparing for. Check out them on Google. Another thing that might be good is to familiarize yourself with what coverages they might need. So there are several resources. I mean, obviously Google is always a good resource, but there's also the Rough Notes or Producer Online, which is also available through Reference Connect. We would be happy to talk to you about this, but it does give you information about each type of business and what types of coverages that they might need. So in any case, that's another option as well, just to give you the confidence when you're in that interview that you might need. I will preface all this by saying that when you do go into a business, you don't actually need to know a bunch about the type of insurance that they require if you do the things a certain way, and we'll talk about that way later, just so that way you don't feel like you have to have a degree in artisan contractor insurance the first time you go meet with an electrician. But we'll go through that method here in just a second. Okay, in the interview, and I want to specify that this is an interview. This is not you getting them a quote, or I guess the main thing that I think is important in terms of the way that you present yourself and your confidence level, from what I've gathered from other agencies and my own personal experience, is that you are interviewing them as much as they are interviewing you. Because remember, in our martini glass model of quoting, we are trying to determine that handshake icon. We're trying to determine their relationship and that, and also like what type of a risk they are. And we're going to go into that more in the third final installment. But it is an interview. You are determining whether or not this is someone that you want to do business with, just as much as they're determining whether or not it's someone that they want to do business with. So make sure when you go in that you kind of think of it that way. And the first thing that you do when you walk in is you want to say, oh, hey, I just wanted to, or I guess you start off by saying, hey, I mentioned when I left last time that, this will really go pretty quickly if you have a copy of your policy, so I have kind of a foundation to work with. Did you have that handy? And of course they won't, and of course they'll have to go look in their file cabinet and hopefully find it and bring it to you. But that's fine, just expect that because they forgot that you said that. And then usually wherever you sit down to do this, or stand in some cases, most of the time you're sitting down, you'll basically pull out your notepad or iPad or whatever it is you use, and you make the indication that you're going to start literally copying their policy word for word. And usually what I would do at that point is just say, I could actually write all this stuff down, but if it's okay, I can just take a picture of each page and that has the numbers on it, and that'll speed things up. Is that okay? And literally I'm pulling out my phone while I say this, and I've never had anyone turn me down. They always just said, oh yeah, that's fine. And so while I'm literally just flipping the pages and taking a picture of every page that looks like it has policy numbers on it, by the way, 2 pictures per page is always a good idea. I found my hand is usually a little shaky when I'm talking to these people for the first time. But you're taking a couple pictures of each deck page, each page with the policy limits and stuff on it. And all you have to do to get a conversation going with any entrepreneur is simply say, so how long have you been doing this? And and what all, and how'd your business get started? Oh my gosh, they will talk longer than the 10 or 15 minutes in almost every instance. And usually they'll tell you everything that they do, and if they don't, you can ask them, so what all do you do here? While they're telling you this, and you're taking pictures, you're making mental notes and thinking about the business and learning essentially the description of operations. What they're telling you is, basically what you complete on the Accord 125, that description of operations. That's what all they're telling you. So you want to know all the good things, you want to know the negative things and how to offset those with good things, but that will probably take the full time. It's just dialoguing with them, building them up, showing genuine interest about their business. Again, at this point you don't necessarily have to try to diagnose any problems. In fact, I would not diagnose any problems. I would just listen, and I would try to ask some probing questions also, like, so what is it that you like about your current insurance? What is it that you don't like about your current insurance? If you had to choose the best agent or agency, what are some things that you're looking for? Or what is it that you don't like about working with insurance agents and that sort of thing? You just want to try to figure out their pains and poke around a little bit, because you're going to need that information to sell your policy. So you might as well start here in the interview, and that's a key point. Try to identify those pains any step of the way you can. Okay, and I mentioned that here. Obviously, discover the pains that you have with your current policy and the current agents. Understand that the relationship is probably one of the most key points in this sales process. Sometimes way more important than price. In fact, I'd say most of the time it is. Sometimes it's just hidden. Keep in mind with commercial lines, the current agent can always lower their price, almost always. So you can kill the price and they can still end up staying with their existing agent. Their existing agent will just lower their get credits on their existing policy. So make sure that it's a bond that's weak enough to break. And if it's not, you just need to walk. And again, going back to that know when to hold them, know when to fold them thing, you've got to know when to walk and not think that you're wasting your time by walking. You're actually saving your time. Okay. There are some things that aren't on their policy. So as you're flipping through the pages and taking 2 pictures, there are a few things that you're going to need to ask them. And some of those questions are, what are your annual gross sales? And if they want to know, well, why are you asking me that personal question? You can explain to them that your annual sales are the basis for the liability part of the policy. So in other words, if you have $10 million of sales, and I always use an exaggerated number, if you have $10 million of sales, that means that you've got more people usually walking through your store than if you have $100 worth of sales. So, what just a ballpark. I don't need like tax info or anything. Just kind of a ballpark. What do you think per year annual sales? And then they'll give you a number at that point. The next thing that you need are driver's license numbers for the drivers. Sometimes they have it, sometimes they don't. They'll usually tell you if they've had any claims in the last 5 years, and just make sure you reiterate the fact that if they say they haven't had any, that after a new policy is issued, they will go back and double check, and at that point the policy premium could raise. So you do want to make sure that they think hard about if they've had any claims. When are the updates? Have there been any updates on the building in the last, I guess since you've had it or since the building's been around? And then there are 2 sheets of paper that I have them sign before I leave. One of them is a lost run request form, which basically says I give Josh the ability to run a lost run with your existing carrier, and I fax that to the current carrier's claims department number, and I will be able to distribute that to you. And then the other thing is an NCCI record release form. And basically, there's a Council of Compensation Insurance, National Council of Compensation Insurance, which has an experience modifier that they give to each work comp policy that's had over $3,000 of premium with over 3 years of experience. And that modifier determines the final premium on work comp. And the bottom line is, I need that information sometimes, especially if they've had losses on their work comp. It is on their current policy's deck page, but sometimes obviously that's a year old. So if I need to pull a new one, it does cost about $35 to pull, but if we determine that we need to pull that, I need to have that form signed, so it's always easiest just to have that up front. So I have them sign those 2 forms, and again, we'll provide those to you if you don't have these documents already, and as well as instructions on how to use them. But after I have them sign those 2 forms, that's pretty much it in terms of my interaction with them in terms of getting information. Okay, so I end the meeting with having them sign those forms, and then I do something that's extremely, extremely important. I let them know that I'm going to be doing a lot of work for them. And that is probably one of the most important parts of this whole transaction. Because if they don't understand that I'm going to be filling out a lot of applications and spending time, my next very important sentence won't make sense, which is, I need to know that you as a customer, that if I come back with a quote that is, at or better what you're paying now, or if I can provide you with coverage that's, at or better than what you have now also, that you're willing to switch. And I just need to know straight up if that's, you've kind of gotten to know me a little bit here. Hopefully you've given them the impression that you care about their business by asking them how they start and obviously giving them a good feeling. Am I someone that you'd be willing to work with? People know, what is it now, in the first 15 or 20 seconds, whether or not you're someone they could work with. You need to know if that's true, because many times at this point, they will either say yes, or they'll say, well, actually, my insurance agent's my brother-in-law. I couldn't actually switch if I wanted to. That's very important to know, and a lot of times they won't tell you. In fact, almost always they won't tell you unless you ask. So you've got to ask, because you've got to know whether you're wasting your time or whether you need to proceed. And you can use this as a selling point at the final proposal if you asked them the question and they said yes. So highlight, star, whatever, this part of the conversation, because if you skip it because you're too excited to get out of the door, it will come back to haunt you. And I've been burned so many times because I didn't ask this question. So anyway, that really obviously strikes a chord with me because I've had some very bad experiences because I didn't ask for that. But you ask them and they say yes. And at that time, you want to inform them of a couple things. First off, that the insurance companies are probably going to come back with some additional questions. It's a good thing you've got 90 days before the policy renews. So is there someone else in the office here that I need to work with if I have these questions? Or should I be calling you with these things? Usually, or hopefully at that time, they turn it over to someone else that you can talk to. But otherwise, you'll get their card or email address, or get that other individual's card or email address. And then on your way out, you'll want to take note of your surroundings so that you can provide a narrative for the underwriter, and also take pictures on the way out, especially of any alarms or sprinkler systems or anything like that. So you're taking your pictures, you're out the door, and you're heading back to the office. Now comes the fun part. Back at the office, you're going to fill out the Accord applications, or you can use our online Access Plus submission portal, depending on whether or not you're using your own carriers or whether or not you're writing through Access Plus. And you can feel free to email me with questions about which forms to complete, or Rosanna in our office. But the bottom line is, we're here to help you as to what to fill out. If there's any missing information, though, as you're filling out the apps, you want to make sure and save that off to the side so that you call them as few times as possible to get the extra information. So in other words, obviously, you don't want to call them every single time you run into a question you forgot to ask them during the interview. You want to go through the applications as much as possible, writing down the questions that you need to follow up with, and then, call them and ask those questions. Simple as that. Multiple phone calls aren't bad because it actually gives you more of a chance to establish a relationship. If you think about the limited amount of time that you have to develop the relationship, you'll actually value all those times that you had to call them during that, information process, because it'll come back and help you in the long run. So just keep that in mind too. Those calls aren't bad. They're good, especially if you word them in a way that makes it feel like you're really trying to understand their business and really trying to make sure that you get them the coverage they need. And I would lead with that when I call them. Hey, Bob, I just wanted to make sure I understood this correctly, and the carrier asked a good question. They wanted to know whether or not, this room was used for storage or whether or not you're using it for something else. Oh, I'm using it for storage. Okay, that's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure. We always want to make sure that, you have the coverage that you need. And I'm putting together a really good policy here for you. So I appreciate you taking the time to answer that for me. That's something that's going to help you out too in the long run. Okay. Once you've gotten everything completed, you submit the applications and everything to the underwriters, or quote it on the carrier's site, or use the online portal. And then the next step, kind of coming towards the end here, is that, there's a couple schools of thought. One school of thought is that you are the first person in. You're the first person to propose the policy. The other school of thought is you want to wait until the other person's presented theirs, or their current agent has presented theirs, so that way they can't lower the price on you. Both are just equally viable. I personally am most familiar with the second method, and that's the way that the other agents that I interviewed presented theirs, so I guess that's what I'll present here. So using that method where you wait for them to get their renewal, the most effective way that I've found is when you call them, maybe a month before the policy renews. Let's say you have the majority of your quotes back, or all of them. Usually there's always one or two carriers that you're still waiting on. I would call them and say, hey, Bob, I've been getting some really good quotes here, but I just wondered, have you gotten your renewal premium back yet from your current carrier? Well, no, I don't have it yet. Okay, well, no problem. I just was mostly calling to let you know, give you a status update. Let me know when you get your renewal back, and I'll try to get mine back here as soon as possible. We'll set up a time that I can go over these with you. Okay. Call back the next week. Same thing. Call back the next week. Same thing. Maybe I'm pretty sure that I have all of my quotes in that I'm going to get, but I still want to wait until I know what their renewal premium is. So the 1 week that I call and I say, hey, Bob, I just checking to see, I just reiterating, I'm getting some really good ones here. Did you get your renewal back yet? Yeah, I did. Oh, okay. I've been hearing that QBE's been taking some rate increases. Did it go up quite a bit from last year? Well, no, actually it went down. Oh, okay. Okay, obviously you get what I'm doing there. I'm trying to feel, did the policy go up or down? If it went up, well, then I know that if I've got a quote that is lower than what they had before, I'm good to go. If they say, oh, actually I got it and it went down, then I know, okay, if I was pretty close here in premium, I'm going to need to call the underwriter and try to get some credits and get that premium lowered some more. I want to make sure that I've got as much intel as possible to know where my quote needs to be. Now, once I've got it and I'm ready to go, I call to set up the proposal. I give myself at least a day or two so I can mentally rehearse. I can put together a nice proposal, and then I go and I set that up with them. Okay, I'm proposing a meeting date close enough to the renewal that I can sell it to the client, but not so far out that their current agent can lower their price on me. Usually it takes a week or two to get credits and approval, sometimes less. But I ask them to have their renewal quote ready when I visit them, so that way we can accurately compare coverages and rates. And I, again, don't want to give their current agent enough time to lower their premium. I create a quality proposal. Nothing's more embarrassing than when they have their nice fancy binder from their current agent and you walk in with some stapled black and white pages. I also want to familiarize myself with the differences between the new policy and their old policy. And you never want to say, my policy has this and yours doesn't. You always want to say something to the effect of, the best I can tell, your existing policy doesn't have this. It's something you'd have to probably check with your agent to know for sure. But I made sure that we had this covered in your policy because I think it's really important, and here's why. These are just things that make you not look like you're bashing them, but giving them something that you feel is important and that you really want to take care of them. We present the proposal, and most importantly, remember those pains that we had uncovered during the interview process, and also during kind of those conversations that we've had maybe in the middle. We stress those pains. We're going to talk more about that in the final installment, but we want to find the pains and we want to explain why our policy and our agency is going to fix those pains. And then we sell the proposal by assuming that they're going to buy it, and we have upheld our end of the deal. Remember, our deal was if we came back with a price that is at or better than what they currently have, or coverage is at or better, that they're going to go with us. So all we've got to do at this point is just ask for the down payment. And as casually and laid back as you can, in my sales style anyway, the better. So I'm going to say, all right, it looks like we have a great policy here for you. We reiterate the pains, reiterate the fixes. We say, this is better than what you currently had in terms of price. I feel that we have at or better coverages than what you had before. All we need is X amount down, and we can get this policy going for you right at the renewal. Here are the spots that we'll need you to sign, and I'm literally turning this thing around and telling them where to sign. That's it. That's my sales style. You might close them a different way. I actually had, the key though is you must close them. You must in some way ask for the sale. If you don't ask for the sale, they'll say, all right, thanks. I'll take a look at this. I'll think about it. And then they'll take it to their current agent. You have to get the sale while you're there. Otherwise, they'll take it to their existing agent, and their existing agent will lower their price. So when you're in front of them is when they are writing the check and when they are signing the document. If you walk out the door without those two things, you might as well expect to be leaving it on the table. So don't let that happen if at all possible. I actually had one person literally say, you told me that if I had my price here and if I beat your had met or beat your coverages that you would buy it. And I did that. So now I expect you to sign this. And he was obviously a very hard closer. That is not my sales style, but it worked great for him. And he actually had 3 that he told me about. He was a producer here for our office, and he ended up closing all 3 of those. But in any case, obviously you want to taper this to your style. You want to use your words. You want to use your voice. You want to use something that you're comfortable with and something that gives you confidence. But it really isn't rocket science. It's a very linear method. And of the 6 agencies that I had talked to, all of them used something extremely similar. They were all right along these lines. So if you have any questions, definitely let us know. Everything's a little different, but it's all very similar, and we're just happy to help. So I appreciate everyone being on the webinar today, and I hope that you have a good one. Thanks so much.